On that ordinary morning, fate decided to play a trick on a simple young woman. She was walking hurriedly through the busy city streets, worried about overdue bills and an uncertain future, when a careless moment changed everything. A small scratch on a luxurious car might seem like a minor detail, but this was no ordinary car. It belonged to the most feared man in the region, known to all as the Mafia boss. His cold, imposing gaze paralyzed even the bravest. But in that unexpected moment, upon seeing the frightened, innocent girl before him, something in his hardened heart broke. Driven by a mixture of rage and fascination, he wouldn't let her escape. The decision was immediate, almost impulsive. She would be taken to his world, where no one dared challenge him. What seemed like the beginning of a nightmare would soon turn into a story filled with tension, secrets, and forbidden feelings. Between luxurious walls and invisible dangers, she would discover that prison could hide not only fear, but also a love as intense as it was impossible, capable of defying the Mafia's own rules. The accident that changed everything. The morning started like any other for Clara. The sun still peeked timidly between the tall buildings, casting long shadows over the sidewalks wet from the previous night's rain. The city had that distinctive smell of damp asphalt, mixed with car exhaust and fresh coffee from the newly opened bakeries. Clara hurried along with the delivery cart, balancing vases of flowers wrapped in colorful paper. It was her job at the small downtown flower shop, fulfilling birthday and office orders, always smiling even when her heart was heavy, with overdue bills and worries about her sick mother at home. In her haste to cross the narrow street, she failed to notice the vehicle parked next to the yellow line. The cart slammed into the road, the metallic sound too loud to ignore. Clara stopped in her tracks. Her gaze slowly descended to the damage. A long, sharp scratch on the impeccable paintwork of a black car. It wasn't just any car. The windows were so dark they reflected her own expression of terror. The wheels gleamed like jewels, and the metal emblem on the front indicated a brand she would never have dreamed of buying, not even in 100 years of work. Her heart raced. She bent down, running a trembling hand over the scratch, as if she could erase it with her touch. But the damage was there, glaring. "My God, what have I done?" she murmured to herself, already feeling cold sweat trickle down the back of her neck. A shiver ran through her body when she heard firm footsteps echoing behind her. She turned slowly and came upon a scene that would change her life forever. A tall man with impeccable posture walked toward her. He wore a perfectly tailored dark blue suit, a tight tie, and a white shirt without a crease. His face was austere, marked by strong features and dark eyes that seemed to pierce any facade of courage. There was something in the way he moved, steady, controlled, as if the whole world were just a stage where he dictated the rules. With each step, the air seemed heavier. Clara felt her legs weaken, but she couldn't move. The man stopped in front of the car, ran his fingers over the scratch, and slowly looked up at her. The silence weighed like a sentence. The curious bystanders whispered softly, recognizing his presence. This was no ordinary man. Dante Moretti, a name whispered in bars, veiled headlines in newspapers, the Mafia boss who ruled the city from the shadows. His empire extended to illegal casinos, nightclubs, and businesses no one dared investigate. "Do you know what you just did?" His deep voice broke the silence like a sharp blade. There was no scream, but the calm contained in his words was even more terrifying. Clara tried to stammer an explanation, talking about the flower cart, about not seeing the cart. But the words came out disjointed, caught in a knot of fear. Her eyes welled up, not only at the prospect of punishment, but at the strange sensation of standing before a man who dominated every inch of the space with just a glance. Whispers grew louder among the passers-by, but no one dared approach. Everyone knew Dante wasn't someone to argue with. Even the police avoided his path. Clara felt her throat dry, her breathing quicken, as if she were trapped in a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. Dante watched her for long seconds, as if studying not only her face but also her soul. There was anger, yes, but there was also something unexpected, a disturbing curiosity. That girl, in her simple uniform, with her dirt-stained hands and frightened eyes, had managed to awaken something within him. It was like a crack in his icy wall. "Get in the car," he ordered, opening the back door with a firm gesture. His tone brooked no refusal. Clara froze, her entire body trembling. "Please, it was an accident. I'll pay for the repairs." She tried to plead, but Dante's gaze cut her off like a final sentence. There was no negotiation. Feeling the world spin, she got into the car. The soft leather upholstery contrasted with the chill that gripped her body. The door closed behind her with a click that sounded like a prison. The driver started the car, and the deep roar of the engine filled the suffocating silence. Dante climbed in soon after, settling in beside her. The space seemed too small to contain the intensity of his presence. Clara kept her eyes fixed on her hands, trying to control her breathing. The silence was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic sound of the engine. Inside her, her mind raced. Was she being taken to some kind of captivity? Was she doomed? Would she never see her mother again? On Dante's side, thoughts were different. The scratch on the car to him was insignificant. There was something much more intriguing going on. How had a simple girl, without luxury, without calculated fear, managed to destabilize his usual coldness? Dante had always prided himself on absolute control, of people, of business, of enemies. But in front of her, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, an unexpected impulse. As the car glided through the city's wide avenues, each traffic light seemed to heighten the tension between them. Clara wanted to ask where they were going, but her voice refused to emerge. Dante, for his part, kept his eyes fixed on the window, as if thinking 1,000 things at once. Behind that facade of power, a strange flame was beginning to ignite, and Clara, unbeknownst to her, had already become the center of a dangerous game, where fear and desire would walk side by side. With every mile she traveled, her life moved further away from the normalcy she knew. The flowers, the simple routine, the small dreams, everything seemed distant, almost unattainable. And in that piercing silence, Clara understood a painful truth. Her fate now lay in the hands of a man who held both danger and allure. And though she wanted to escape, something inside her sensed this prison would extend far beyond visible bars. The first confrontation in the Mafia world. The car hurtled through the city like a silent beast. Clara, sitting in the back seat, watched the traffic lights reflect off the glass, growing ever more distant from everything she knew. The flower shop, the simple house where she lived with her mother, her modest routine, everything seemed to dissolve before the speed with which fate was tearing her from her ordinary life. The silence inside the vehicle was suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic sound of the engine and Dante's heavy breathing beside her. He didn't look directly at her, but his presence was overwhelming. His every movement, every adjustment of his jacket, every glance out the window conveyed the feeling that this man held the power to decide not only the course of this trip, but also her future. Clara clasped her hands in her lap, trying to contain her trembling. Her heart was beating so fast, it felt like it was about to leap from her chest. Her mind screamed at her to flee, but how could she escape a man who dominated the entire city? She risked a discreet glance at Dante, expecting only coldness, but what she saw confused her. His eyes reflected something beyond anger. There was curiosity, a barely perceptible spark, as if he himself were surprised by his own decision to take her. The car finally left the bustling city center and entered wider streets, lined with luxurious buildings and armed security guards at every corner. The destination was clear. This was no leisurely stroll or a passing threat. Clara was being driven to the heart of Dante's world. The vehicle entered through an imposing iron gate that slowly opened, revealing a mansion surrounded by immaculate gardens and cameras, tracking every movement. When the car door opened, Clara felt the cold night air rush into her lungs. She tried to take a hesitant step, but it was Dante's gaze that forced her to step outside. The sound of her heels clicking on the marble floor echoed through the courtyard, each step a sentence. Men dressed in black, clearly security guards, watched silently, but none dared question their boss's order. They walked through the mansion's foyer, where crystal chandeliers illuminated walls covered in artwork and imported furniture. Clara had never seen such luxury together, but it didn't impress her. On the contrary, it heightened her feeling of being in enemy territory. The gleam of gold, the Persian rugs, the sophisticated details were merely a facade for something dark. She felt it in her skin, as if every object held the secrets of an empire built on blood. Dante finally stopped in the center of the room and turned to her. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he asked, his deep voice echoing through the room. Clara swallowed, her throat dry, and simply shook her head silently. "I could end your life for what you did. I could disappear with you, and no one would dare ask questions," he continued, slowly approaching until his eyes were inches from hers. Clara felt her breath catch, but she summoned what little courage she had left. I didn't know what to do. It was an accident. I'm not a criminal." Her voice was shaky, but firm enough to break, if only for a moment, Dante's barrier of control. He arched his eyebrow in surprise. He was used to seeing absolute fear, desperate pleas, but not a young woman who, even terrified, could maintain some dignity. He watched her in silence for long seconds, and then laughed softly, a laugh that conveyed not joy, but something more enigmatic. "You're brave, or stupid. I haven't decided yet." His words cut like blades, but Clara sensed something. This man wasn't just threatening her, he was testing her. It was as if he wanted to see how strong she was, how far she could endure in the face of such overwhelming power. Dante quickly gestured to one of the security guards, who immediately brought a chair. Clara was forced to sit, as if she were facing a makeshift courtroom. He sat facing her, his gaze fixed, penetrating. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara? Clara Duarte," he replied, almost in a whisper. Dante repeated the name softly, savoring each syllable as if trying to engrave the sound in his memory. "Clara," he finally said, "you have no idea what it means to have caught my eye. Most people pray they never cross my path. But you arrived here without even realizing it." His words hung in the air, charged with mystery. Clara didn't know if it was a threat, a warning, or the beginning of something she would never understand. Time seemed suspended in that room. Fear still pulsed through her veins, but along with it, a strange sensation grew. The realization that this man, behind the iron mask, hid something no one else could see. He was dangerous, yes, but also human. And this contradiction confused her more than the kidnapping itself. The tension was broken when one of the men hurried in, carrying a phone. Dante answered without taking his eyes off her, speaking in a language Clara didn't recognize, but his tone was hard and full of authority. As he hung up, he took a deep breath and stood. "You'll be here for a while," he said bluntly. "Consider this a punishment and an opportunity. You don't know it, but today your life has changed forever." Clara felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. She wanted to scream, run, beg for freedom, but something in Dante's gaze held her in place. It wasn't just fear. There was an inexplicable force, an involuntary attraction, as if part of her wanted to decipher this man who had ripped her from the ordinary world. In that instant, she realized she was facing the beginning of a story that would blend terror, fascination, and desire. And despite herself, a question burned in her mind. Would she be doomed to hate him forever, or would this kidnapping be the beginning of something that not even the Mafia boss himself could control? The clash of realities and the first conflicts. The next few hours seemed to drag on like days for Clara. After the initial confrontation with Dante, she was led to a luxurious room within the mansion. The space was larger than the entire house where she had lived with her mother. Wine-colored silk curtains covered tall windows. The Persian rug beneath her feet felt too soft for someone accustomed to cold tile floors, and a massive bed with crisp white sheets contrasted starkly with the simple mattress she shared with her mother at home. Yet for Clara, all this luxury brought no comfort. It was just another reminder that she was trapped in a world that didn't belong to her. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she tried to process what was happening. Fear still pulsed through her veins, but a feeling of anger was beginning to build alongside it. How dare this man strip her of her life, her responsibilities, just because she'd scratched a car? It wasn't fair, it didn't make sense. But at the same time, an inner voice reminded her that Dante was no ordinary man. He was a Mafia boss, someone who held the entire city in his hands, someone who could decide between life and death for anyone. And she, by accident, had fallen into his orbit. That night, Clara could barely sleep. Every sound in the mansion, footsteps in the hallways, doors closing, muffled voices, made her shiver. When sleep finally overcame her, it was light and restless, filled with confused dreams in which Dante's intense gaze haunted her. In the morning, she was awakened by a firm knock on the door. A tall woman in an impeccable black uniform entered carrying a breakfast tray. She didn't say a word, just set the tray on the table and left silently. Clara looked at the food, fresh fruit, bread, juice, but her stomach was churning with nervousness. A moment later, the door opened again. This time, it was him. Dante entered without asking permission, as if the room were just another of his domains, and studied Clara for a moment. She stood, still in her wrinkled florist uniform, her hair messy from a bad night's sleep, but her eyes were steady, as if refusing to show weakness. "I see you haven't eaten anything," he said, his deep voice filling the space. Clara didn't respond. "Are you afraid of being poisoned?" he asked sarcastically, arching an eyebrow. Still, there was no reaction. It was then that she decided to speak, gathering her courage. "I didn't ask to be here. I have a mother who depends on me, a job. You can't just kidnap me like you own my life." Dante walked slowly until he stood before her. His gaze was sharp, but there was something deeper behind it. "I can," he replied simply. The coldness of his words made her heart freeze, but he continued, "And you know why? Because I don't usually let anything get to me. But you came into my life in a way I can't ignore." Clara was speechless. What was that? She'd scratched a car, that was all. How could that have changed so much? But looking into his eyes, she realized it wasn't just about the scratch. There was an intensity there, as if Dante were waging a silent battle within himself. The silence stretched on until Dante broke the tension. "Get dressed. I want to show you something." He left the room, leaving Clara confused and hesitant. Minutes later, one of the maids brought in new clothes, expensive dresses from brands Clara had only seen in shop windows. Reluctantly, she changed. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked like a stranger, someone who didn't belong in that reflection. When she returned to the main hall, Dante was waiting for her. He led her through the mansion, passing through corridors decorated with paintings that must have been worth a fortune, until they reached a large balcony that opened onto the city. From above, Clara could see the skyscrapers glistening in the sun, the cars moving like scurrying ants, the people hurrying about their daily routines. From up there, everything seemed small, distant, insignificant. "See," Dante said, approaching her. "From here, I control everything. Money, power, respect. But none of those things give me what you gave me with that accident." Clara turned to him, confused and indignant. "And what did I give you?" she asked. He took a deep breath as if searching for the right word. "A mistake. Simple, human, unexpected. Something no one would dare do to me. You didn't treat me like an untouchable king, nor like a monster. You just hurt me." Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. She couldn't decide if that was a compliment or a condemnation. But before she could respond, Dante moved closer, so close that she could feel the warmth of his presence. "And that's why you're not leaving," he added firmly. She took a step back, her heart racing. "This is crazy. You can't keep me here against my will." Dante smiled at the corner of his mouth, an enigmatic, almost dangerous smile. "I can, and I will. Because now you're part of my life, whether you like it or not." The silence that followed was piercing. Clara knew she was trapped not just physically, but in something much larger, a web of power, desire, and danger that could engulf her completely. Yet, within her, a contradictory flame began to ignite. The fear was still there, but mixed with something she didn't want to admit, a growing curiosity about this man everyone feared, but who, before her, showed invisible cracks. That night, back in her room, Clara couldn't sleep. His words echoed in her mind. "You hit me. It was insane. It was wrong." But something inside her was beginning to understand that her life would never be the same again. The shock of reality was just beginning, and with it, the first conflicts that would define whether she would survive or be lost in the Mafia world. Clara's resistance and early ties with Dante, the following days seemed to drag on at a strange pace, as if time had lost track within that mansion. For Clara, every second was a struggle between the will to resist and the fear of being crushed by Dante's power. She would wake in a luxurious room, surrounded by comforts that didn't belong to her, and spend hours staring out the window, trying to imagine how her mother's life was going without her. Longing tightened her chest, transforming into a constant ache that no amount of wealth could soothe. Still, her mind refused to bend. If Dante expected submission, he would meet resistance. From day one, Clara drew an invisible line. She would not allow that man, no matter how dangerous, to erase her essence. When servants brought expensive dresses, she preferred to remain in simple clothes whenever possible. When extravagant dinners were served, she ate sparingly, more for survival than pleasure. The mansion offered banquets, but no dish tasted quite like the rice and beans she shared with her mother at home. It was her silent way of staying connected to the real world, to what still defined her. Dante observed everything closely. He rarely spoke much, but his eyes registered her every gesture. The Mafia boss, accustomed to having the world kneel at his feet, was beginning to notice that Clara was different. She didn't cry every night. She didn't beg for freedom in despair. On the contrary, she maintained a posture of dignity that intrigued him. It was as if, within that apparent fragility, there was a strength he couldn't break. And this strength attracted him as much as it irritated him. One afternoon, Dante found her sitting in the mansion's garden, surrounded by roses that seemed cultivated to never wilt. Clara had her hands in the soil, as she did at the flower shop, and closed her eyes to smell the petals. When she noticed his presence, she didn't get up or try to hide it. She simply remained there, silent. "You like flowers," he commented, coming closer. "I like them because they're sincere," Clara replied without looking at him. "They don't pretend to be something they're not. If they're wilting, they show it. If they're alive, they flourish. They don't wear masks." Her words struck Dante more than he cared to admit. Masks were all he knew. From a young age, he'd learned to hide his weaknesses, to construct an image of absolute power. But in front of this girl, each word seemed to rip away pieces of the armor he'd spent decades strengthening. "You sound like you're judging me," he said neutrally. "I don't need to judge. You already know who you are," Clara replied, finally looking up at him. Her gaze was steady, even though it was filled with fear. For a moment, Dante was silent. Then, surprisingly, he laughed softly, a short, almost admiring laugh. "You really have no idea what you're getting yourself into, do you?" "I didn't choose to be here," she retorted. That exchange marked the beginning of something new. Dante, accustomed to controlling everything with intimidation, began to realize that Clara would not surrender easily. And instead of punishing her, he found himself increasingly interested in testing her limits. That same night during dinner, Dante made an unexpected decision. He sat across from her at the long table and said, "Starting tomorrow, I want you to come with me. I want you to see my world with your own eyes." Clara swallowed. The idea of delving deeper into that universe of shadows terrified her, but also challenged her. "What if I refuse?" he asked. "There is no refusal," Dante replied simply. The next day, Clara was taken to one of Dante's nightclubs. The atmosphere was completely different from anything I'd ever seen. Red and gold lights, loud music, rich and influential people milling about amid discreet security guards. Dante walked among them like a king in his territory, greeted with equal parts respect and fear. Clara, at his side, felt out of place, but she also noticed the curious and even hostile looks she received. Many wondered who the young woman was, who dared to be so close to the boss. At one point, one of Dante's associates, a burly man with cold eyes, approached and gave Clara a disdainful look. "Who is that?" he asked dismissively. "Someone who doesn't concern you," Dante replied, his tone firm and cutting. The man backed away immediately, but Clara sensed something. Her presence was disturbing. In the Mafia world, any sign of weakness was seized upon, and somehow she represented a crack in Dante's untouchable image. On the way back to the mansion, Clara couldn't resist and said, "You brought me here to show me what? That everyone fears you. I already knew that." Dante took a deep breath, controlling his impatience. "I wanted you to see what it means to be close to me. It's not just luxury, it's also enemies, dangers, betrayals. You're in it now, whether you like it or not." "I don't want to," she replied firmly. "And yet it's here," he concluded. Those words echoed in Clara throughout the night. There was hatred, yes, but also a strange feeling that this man, behind all the darkness, saw something in her that even she didn't understand. It was as if Dante was trying to drag her into his world, but at the same time, he was the one being pulled out of his control. In the following days, Clara's resistance didn't wane. She remained firm, refusing to give in completely. But in small ways, she began to notice changes. Dante, who always spoke harshly, sometimes let slip almost personal comments. He asked about her mother, about the flower shop, about simple things that should never interest a man like him. Clara answered curtly, trying to maintain distance, but inside she wondered, why did he want to know that? One night, Clara found him alone in the mansion's library, surrounded by books that seemed at odds with the image of a mobster. Dante was reading, his glasses perched on his face, and didn't immediately notice her presence. When he looked up, he couldn't hide his discomfort at being caught in such an intimate moment. "I didn't think you read," Clara said, surprised. "I didn't think you'd have the courage to interrupt me," he replied, but without aggression. There was even a slight smile on his lips. That simple scene made a mark on her. For the first time, Clara saw Dante not as a mafia boss, but as a man, someone carrying secrets, loneliness, and perhaps even weaknesses. It was at that moment that she realized The line between hatred and curiosity was becoming increasingly blurred. The danger grows, and the birth of the forbidden feeling. The days passed, and the bond between Clara and Dante, though silent, began to take root in unexpected ways. There were no declarations, no explicit gestures of affection. Everything happened in small details, almost invisible to outsiders. But for her, every lingering look, every question about her life, every pause in his voice was a veiled confession that something was changing. And this change, paradoxically, brought not only closeness but also danger. Dante's world wasn't just about luxury and power. It was a constant game of threats, betrayals, and lurking enemies. Clara began to realize this when one night, while dining alone, she heard a muffled argument in one of the hallways, raised voices, men talking about a movement by the rival faction and an imminent attack. Her heart raced as she realized the house she was in wasn't a safe haven, but an invisible battlefield. That same night, Dante entered her room. His usual controlled calm was gone. He was tense, his tie loose, his gaze dark. "You will stay here. Don't leave for anything," he ordered, before disappearing into the hallways. Clara stood still, her ears straining for the distant sound of footsteps, doors slamming, and at one point, even muffled gunshots coming from the back of the property. Fear gripped her, and she understood, perhaps for the first time, that her life was truly in danger simply by being linked to him. Hours later, Dante returned. His shirt was stained with blood, but he didn't appear injured. He came in, closed the door, and without saying anything sat down in the armchair. Clara watched him silently, trying to control her panic. What should she do? Ask? Keep quiet? Instinct prevailed. She stood up slowly, grabbed a towel from the table, and approached him. Dante looked at her in surprise, but didn't stop her. Clara pressed the towel to a small wound on his arm. "It's nothing," he murmured. "It's blood," she replied firmly. The scene seemed absurd. She, an ordinary florist, caring for a Mafia boss. But in that moment, there were no bosses or hostages, just a tired, wounded man, allowing someone to touch a part of himself he rarely showed. Dante watched her silently, and Clara felt the weight of his gaze as he tended to the wound. There was something different in those dark eyes. It wasn't just the predator, the controller, but also the lonely man bearing invisible scars. When he finished, Clara stepped back, but Dante held her hand for a moment. "You don't understand what you're getting yourself into," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. She took a deep breath, her heart racing. "I didn't ask to be here," he replied, but his voice lacked the same firmness as before. That night, Clara dreamed of him. Not the threatening mobster, but the man who had held her hand. The dream disturbed her, because when she woke, she realized she was beginning to feel something she never imagined: compassion. And hidden between the fear and anger, there was also the seed of a forbidden desire. The following days brought even more tension. Dante began bringing her to some of his meetings, perhaps to keep an eye on her, perhaps to test her. Clara watched men in ties discuss figures, territories, and alliances, always with an air of distrust. It was a world where no one trusted anyone, and every handshake felt like a disguised threat. She noticed how Dante dominated the room with his presence, but she also noticed how the eyes of others occasionally turned to her. At one of these meetings, one of the men dared to provoke. "You're weakening, Moretti. First you let a stranger into your home, now you bring her to our tables. This doesn't sound like the man we know." The silence that followed was suffocating. Dante stood slowly, the tension in the air so thick Clara could barely breathe. "Watch your words," he said, every syllable laden with threat. The man backed away, but Clara understood clearly. His presence wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous for both of them. Back at the mansion, she decided to confront him. You're exposing me. These men don't want me here. They hate me because you keep me close." Dante stepped closer, his face inches from hers. "They may hate you. They may try to tear you down, but no one will touch you. As long as you're with me, you're protected." "Protected?" Clara repeated, her voice breaking. "I'm in a prison, Dante. I don't live, I survive, surrounded by people who see me as a threat. And you call it protection?" His gaze softened, just for a moment. "Don't you understand? I can't let her go anymore." The words fell on Clara like a huge weight. She felt her anger mix with something deeper, something that frightened her even more than Dante himself. The knowledge that part of her didn't want to leave either. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She walked to the mansion's balcony, where the cold dawn wind enveloped her. She looked at the illuminated city, so close and yet so far away. Her heart beat fast, torn between the urge to flee and the inexplicable desire to stay. Suddenly, she felt his presence behind her. Dante approached silently, stopping a few steps away. "You should be sleeping," he said, but his voice was slurred. It was almost a whisper. "And you?" she replied without turning around. "Can you sleep with so much on your back?" He didn't answer right away. He walked to the railing and stood beside her, looking out over the city. "Sleep is a luxury I can't afford," he confessed. Clara turned to look at him and for the first time saw not the mobster, but the man. There was weariness, loneliness, and something resembling regret on his face. The silence between them was filled only by the wind. Then, in an unexpected gesture, Dante took her hand. It was simple, without violence, without imposition. Clara should have retreated, moved away, rejected him, but she didn't. She stood there, feeling the warmth of his hand, knowing that the gesture was dangerous, wrong, but also true. It was in that moment that Clara understood. The danger wasn't just Dante's enemies or the weapons hidden in the mansion's corridors. The real danger lay in what was growing inside her, in the forbidden feeling that was seeping into her heart. And though she fought it, she knew she couldn't erase it. From that moment on, there was no turning back. The Mafia world was no longer just a prison. Now it was also the place where, against all logic, against all common sense, love began to blossom. The threat of enemies and the final choice. Dawn brought a strange calm to the mansion, but Clara quickly realized it wasn't peace, but rather the tense silence that precedes a storm. Dante's demeanor had changed since the night he held her hand on the balcony. He was more restless, more withdrawn, as if a part of him was at constant war. Clara, for her part, struggled with her own feelings. She wanted to hate him, wanted to remember him only as the kidnapper, the Mafia boss who had ripped her from her simple life. But increasingly, the subtle gestures, the intense looks, and the humanity hidden beneath the iron mask troubled her heart. It was on the third day after that dawn that the danger revealed itself brutally. Clara was in the library, trying to distract herself with a book she could barely read, when she heard hurried footsteps and tense voices in the hallway. Dante entered next, accompanied by two armed men. His gaze was firm, but there was something different, a shadow of concern. "Clara, I need you to come with me now," he said, extending his hand. She hesitated for a moment, but the seriousness on his face left no room for resistance. She followed him through the corridors to a hidden room that looked like a command room. Maps of the city were spread out on the table, along with reports and weapons. "They know about you," Dante said finally. "My enemies have discovered you're here. They're planning to use you against me." The words fell on Clara like stones. Fear filled her body again, but there was also indignation. "I warned you. I should never have been here. Now my life and my mother's are at risk because of you." Dante took a deep breath, as if carrying a weight greater than he could bear. He approached her, his eyes steady. I know, but now it's no longer a matter of choice. You're involved, Clara, and I won't let anyone touch you. That night, the mansion became a silent battlefield. Guards took turns at the entrances. Cameras monitored every second. Clara was kept close to Dante at all times, a measure that both terrified her and, paradoxically, made her feel protected. He never left her alone, even for a moment, and this further intensified the invisible bond between them. But the enemies were quick to act. Shortly before midnight, the main gate was attacked. The sound of gunfire and explosions echoed through the courtyard, making Clara shudder. Dante grabbed her arm and pulled her into a hidden corridor. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his deep voice urgent. The escape through the corridors was a whirlwind of sounds and sights. Armed men running, muffled screams, doors being broken down. Clara could barely breathe, her heart pounding. When they reached a secluded room, Dante locked the door and pushed her against the wall, his face close to hers. "If anything happens to me, you'll run. Promise." "I can't promise anything. I won't leave you here alone," she cried, her voice choked with tears. Dante's gaze softened for a moment, as if those words had reached the very edge of his soul. He lifted his hand and touched her face, gently, like he'd never done before. "You're the only thing that makes me feel truly alive, Clara. I don't want to lose that." The moment was interrupted by the roar of an explosion that shook the mansion. Dante grabbed a gun and opened the door. Clara, driven by instinct, ran after him, despite all her protests. The confrontation in the main hall was brutal. Masked men fired in all directions, security guards fell, and chaos reigned. Clara ducked behind a table, but she never took her eyes off Dante, who fought with the ferocity of someone with nothing to lose. Amid the gunfire, one of the enemies managed to get close to her. Clara screamed, but before she could react, Dante stepped in, taking a shot to the shoulder. The world seemed to stop. She ran to him, holding him as blood flowed. "Don't do this to me," she pleaded, pressing her hands to the wound. Even wounded, Dante raised his gun and fired at the attacker, knocking him down. Then he turned to Clara, his eyes burning with pain and intensity. "I told you, no one touches you." The conflict lasted for hours, but Dante's Mafia managed to repel the attack. When silence finally returned, Clara was still by his side, tending to his wound. Medics arrived to treat him, but Dante refused to let go, holding her hand as if it were his anchor. The next morning, in his room, Clara remained beside him, watching him fall asleep for the first time. The mask of hardness had disappeared, revealing only a tired, vulnerable human man. She realized she could no longer deny it. She was in love. It was wrong, it was dangerous, but it was real. The following days were spent rebuilding. The mansion had been partially destroyed, but the external threat had been contained. Still, Dante knew it wouldn't last long. The enemies would return, stronger, more cruel, and Clara was now an inevitable part of their war. It was then that he made a decision. One night, he called her to the balcony where it all began. The cold dawn wind cut through the silence, and Dante looked more serious than ever. "You have to choose, Clara. You can leave now, go back to your life, to your mother. I myself will make sure no one touches you, but if you stay, you'll be accepting to live in this world with me. A world of danger, but also of both of us." Clara felt her heart race. It was everything she'd dreamed of since she'd been kidnapped, the chance to leave to regain her freedom. But at the same time, the thought of leaving Dante, of never again seeing those eyes that haunted and attracted her, was unbearable. Tears streamed down her face as she answered, her voice firm despite her fear. "My life will never be the same, even if I leave. You're already a part of me, so I'll stay." Dante closed his eyes for a moment, as if that choice were both the relief he'd hoped for and the burden he'd feared. When he opened them, he pulled Clara close and enveloped her in an embrace that wasn't one of possession, but of surrender. For the first time, there was no boss, no hostage, No mafia, just two hearts beating out of sync, choosing each other against all odds. But deep down, they both knew that love, born of chance and watered by danger, would also be the greatest battle of their lives.